The Stoic education of Apostle Paul. To understand how Paul of Tarsus thought and wrote, we must place him not only within Judaism, but also within the wider Greek-speaking world of his time. That world was shaped by a system of education known as paideia. Paideia was not just schooling in facts. It was a way of forming a person's mind, character, and ability to speak and reason in public life. In the Greco-Roman world, this kind of education was common in major cities and strongly influenced how people thought about truth, morality, and the self. Paideia included training in Greek language and literature, history, public speaking, and philosophy. Two important philosophical traditions were Stoicism and Epicureanism. The goal was not simply to store information, but to shape a person who could think clearly, speak persuasively, and live according to reason. This kind of education shaped how people argued, how they understood the world, and how they understood themselves. Paul grew up in Tarsus, a city well known in the ancient world for its learning. Ancient writers such as Strabo described Tarsus as a center of philosophy and education, comparable to Athens and Alexandria. Because of this, it is unlikely that Paul was untouched by Greek education simply because he was Jewish. Living in such a city meant constant exposure to Greek language, ideas, and ways of thinking. Paul's later writings show strong command of Greek and careful argumentation, which suggests that his mind was shaped by this environment. Other Jewish thinkers from the same period show a similar pattern. Philo of Alexandria received a full Greek education while remaining deeply Jewish in his beliefs. Josephus also wrote in polished Greek and used Greek historical and rhetorical styles. In both cases, Jewish identity did not prevent participation in Greek education. Paul fits within this same historical pattern. Paul's familiarity with Greek philosophy becomes especially clear in his speech in Athens, recorded in Acts 17. Speaking before Greek thinkers at the Areopagus, Paul does not quote the Hebrew Scriptures. Instead, he quotes Greek poets, including the Stoic poet Aratus, when he says, "For we are indeed his offspring." By doing this, Paul connects with ideas his audience already understands. He speaks of God not as a local deity, but as the source of all life, in whom we live and move and have our being. Paul does not reject Greek philosophy outright. Instead, he redirects it toward a God who is personal and revealed in history through Christ. This event in Athens also raises an important historical question. Unlike Corinth, Philippi, Thessalonica, or Rome, Athens does not appear in Paul's letters. There is no letter to the Athenians. One possible explanation involves church structure and authority. In 1 Corinthians chapters 12 through 14, Paul describes a church where many people participate, gifts are shared, and no rigid hierarchy controls worship. Such a structure may have fit well with Athenian traditions of democracy and shared leadership. However, as Christianity developed, more centralized and authoritative forms of leadership began to emerge, especially in places like Rome. A church model that strongly resisted hierarchy may not have survived within this developing system. It is possible that writings connected to such a model were not preserved. Perhaps they were destroyed. Another striking feature of Paul's Athenian speech is what it does not include. Acts does not explicitly mention the Logos, a key concept in Stoic philosophy that described the rational principle ordering the universe. This absence is surprising, since the Logos would have been a natural bridge between Paul and his audience. The question is not whether Logos language was definitely removed, but whether there were reasons it may have been avoided or left out. One important reason concerns authority. In Stoic thought, the Logos was believed to exist within every person as an inner rational faculty. This meant that people could discover moral truth through reason itself. Right living came from self-control, inner discipline, and alignment with reason rather than obedience to external authority. Talking about the Logos encouraged intellectual independence and moral self-rule. Such ideas could create tension with the Proto-Catholic Church that was increasingly concerned with unity, tradition, and authoritarian structure. A Paul who openly taught through Logos language might have encouraged people to believe that truth could be reached without church authority. Acts, as we have it, presents Paul more as a witness who proclaims Christ than as a philosopher who builds systems of thought. This emphasis supports obedience and faith rather than philosophical independence. Seen this way, understanding Paul through the lens of paideia does not weaken his Jewish faith or originality. Instead, it explains how he was able to communicate a Jewish message to the Greek world. Paul did not simply travel between cultures, he thought across them. His education gave him the tools, and his encounter with Christ gave those tools a new purpose. Paul was not a simple mystic suddenly placed on the world stage. He was a thinker shaped by Greek education and Jewish tradition, uniquely prepared to stand between worlds. Paideia formed his mind, Christ reshaped its center. The result was a message that challenged both philosophical abstraction and rigid institutional control, and in doing so reshaped early Christianity's understanding of belief, community, and authority.